So, North Korea's offer to hold a summit with Japan under certain conditions came just a day after a new diplomatic chapter opened between South Korea and Cuba. What's on the North's mind? Let's turn to Professor Lee Hee-eun for more. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me again.
Good morning. Can the North's rare offer be seen as a response to South Korea-Cuba relations, really?
It might be, but I think it's difficult to say at this point that there's a causal link between, South Korea establishing diplomatic ties with Cuba and now, North Korea making this gesture to Japan to have a summit between the two leaders. But, North Korea, of course, has significant issues with Japan, and namely the biggest issue from the Japanese perspective, of course, domestically is the kidnapping of Japanese citizens back in the 70s and 80s that, North Korea has responded to, as you noted in the report, that all of them have died. But there's suspicions in Japan that there are more, in fact, Japanese citizens that are currently living in North Korea. Prime Minister Kishida has constantly made efforts to try to engage North Korea. And North Korea now responding in this way, I think certainly is a positive sign. But it's really, I think at this point, really too hard to say whether or not this is sort of a tit for tat for South Korea to sort of establish ties with Cuba. But in any event, with respect to this issue, it's certainly possible that this is a response because, within North Korea, the ruling elite, I think, will take this as quite a shock that South Korea has established Cuba relations. And so maybe this is a response to sort of allay and so to a drive within the ruling elite within North Korea that North Korea is doing something positive internationally.
Right, and South Korea has had long pursued diplomatic ties with Cuba. Then what took South Korea and Cuba so long to establish official diplomatic connections? I mean, what's behind Cuba's decision this time?
Right. So Cuba, I think, certainly is in a position where it needs to sort of kind of kickstart its economy. And it's been in isolation with respect to the West, and particularly the United States in this regard. And, has lost a lot of trade volume over the years in terms of its embargo with the United States. But I think, South Korea, of course, has a very positive image around the world, given recent events in South Korea, but also the impact of soft power of South Korea. And so, because of the growing number of investments as well as visitors to Cuba from South Korea, I think Cuba recognizes that it doesn't make sense for Cuba not to forge relations with South Korea anymore. And from a purely economic perspective, there's a lot to be gained by having South Korean companies invest more in Cuba, and for Cubans to sort of have more access to South Korean products and services. And so from Cuba's perspective, it does make a lot of sense for Cuba to be able to sort of establish these diplomatic relations sort of in a normal way.
Right, Professor Lee, you mentioned the news must have been a shock for North Korea, and South Korea's top office believes the newly forged ties will be a big blow to the North. Is that so? I mean, how?
Because traditionally, Cuba and North Korea have been seen to be like basically, a very strong sister relationship between the two countries, especially when Fidel Castro became the leader of Cuba. Because they're both communist nations, there's some solidarity, obviously between the two sides, and both sides basically were very tight-knit in terms of their relations to each other, even throughout the Cold War and after the Cold War ended. And so in this case, with South Korea now establishing regular diplomatic relations with Cuba, this is going to be a huge psychological and political blow within Pyongyang, basically, because this relationship has been so important to North Korea in terms of its international relations. And so from this perspective, I think there's going to be a lot of, I think within the party in North Korea, there's going to be a lot of questions about what happened here and how Cuba was maybe, quote unquote, lost to South Korea in this case. And so we'll see, I think, the ramifications of this played out in the next days and weeks and months ahead.
Definitely. Then I have to ask you, will Pyongyang turn away from Cuba or bring Cuba closer? I mean, I'm sure the North has a lot on its mind at the moment.
Absolutely. I imagine one of the first steps will be for the Cuban ambassador to explain, right, to the leadership in Pyongyang, basically, what happened and how this occurred, given their very close relations. Because, in fact, it's going to be seen as a great embarrassment to North Korea because one of its closest allies who has stuck with it for, thick and thin throughout the last, many years since Fidel Castro became the ruler of Cuba, how Cuba was now able to now become a regular sort of partner or have a regular relationship with South Korea because South Korea and North Korea now are in a position of being essentially enemies, right? So in this case, I think in this case we'll see North Korea reassessing its relationship, but I don't think it's going to shy away from Cuba, but certainly probably make more efforts to engage Cuba more given this circumstance.
Definitely. All right, Professor Lee Hee-eun, we appreciate your insight and your time this morning. You have a great day.
You too.